these toolkits. And so if you're a front-end developer, you're curious, interested in learning more about JavaScript, a lot of these toolkits are going to help you as far as using these toolkits to do a lot of heavy lifting for you when it comes to JavaScript. So we're not going to go too in depth with these toolkits, but it's going to give you a nice general idea of what some of these toolkits can actually do, these frameworks and libraries. And so we're going to be including jQuery, Ember.js, Cujo. Also, we'll be talking about Backbone and also Angular.js. So I'm hoping that everybody can get something out of this as far as the lightning talks go. Everybody's going to have about 10 minutes to talk. Also, we're going to have about 5 minutes for Q&A. So also, the password is up here for the Wi-Fi. Also, we are going to be doing door prizes. So if you, I encourage everybody to basically tweet the event. You can use HTML5, hashtag HTML5 Boston. We'll be wrapping off at least 3 GitHub accounts. I believe one is for like 3, 6, and 1 full year. And then also we're going to be wrapping off a online workshop class through General Assembly. So we're going to be wrapping off 4 of those at the end of the event. Also, we do have beer and also plenty of pizza and soda if you want to drink alcohol. So please help yourself. And we do want to thank our sponsor for the evening, Cinecore. We actually have one of their representatives here today to talk about their company and mention a couple of positions that they have available. So I'm going to introduce Jeff Bacon. Come up, please. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Are you all hear me?
Yeah.
Good. So my name is Jeff Bacon. I come from a company called Cinecore, and we pay for beer. That's a bribe to let me talk to you about for a couple minutes about my company. I'll be quick so we get through it and stuff. So in the past 10 years, we've gone from animated GIFs to short video clips to full premium online video streaming of episodes and movies. So you can get streaming video from content providers like ABC, CBS, Fox, HBO, Star, Showtime. You can get them from third parties like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Redbox, Blockbuster, Vudu, Crunchyroll. You can get them from your cable company like Comcast, Dish, DirecTV, Charter, Verizon. Every one of these sites has its own website. Every one of them has its own Android app. Everyone has its own iPhone app. A lot of them are starting to get into Microsoft phone apps, Roku apps, Xbox apps. So in 10 years, we've gone from funny gifs of cats to thousands of hours of premium content online. And instead of converging on one provider, we've fractured the market to all kinds of places. So if you're looking to watch premium online video, it's actually more complicated now than it was before. It's getting more complicated all the time. So that's where my company comes in. Cinecore is looking to solve these type of problems. We are building next generation software products related to entertainment access, social media, identity management, and content management to help manage this fractured world of online video. We work with cable companies, satellite companies, telecom companies, consumer electronics companies, all to deliver personalized digital entertainment and apps to these consumers. We currently have over 49 telco, cable, and CE companies, 75 content and application partners, and over 20 million active users every single day. We are publicly traded, we are profitable, and we are actually growing. So that's why I'm here. Cinecore is based in Buffalo, New York. Don't need that. But we have an office in Toronto, and we are starting up an office in Boston, specifically in Western Massachusetts. And we're looking to hire a lot of people. So if you're interested, we're a true agile environment. We work with all the new technologies. We do a lot of web work and a lot of back-end work. If you're interested in it, pick up one of these postcards from the pizza table or the table by the door, or come find me and I can give you one and I can tell you more about the company. We're looking to hire a lot of people in the next year. We're going to expand the office to like 50 to 100 engineers in a very short term. So if you're interested or know someone who is, come find me and talk about it, or check out cinecore.com for our help. So Thank you very much.
Oh boy. So this is what's called responsive slide. It's wider and shorter and it's intelligent. So let's not worry about that too much. So as Ron said, I'm found here from Cujo. I organized the jQuery velocity meetup. You can find me on Twitter and GitHub as Trevor Mike. But that's kind of one track. What I want to talk about tonight is jQuery. And so where it fits in with all the other frameworks that are going to be discussed today. So like, what is a framework? What is a toolkit? What's the distinction? So just a little bit of background. I'm going to talk about in the beginning. There was the web, and there was JavaScript, and it was good. And people were making pretty much static documents, and they started to enhance those documents with like really cool, like soccer balls that would follow your mouse cursor, and like image hover, the images that would change really nicely. But as things progressed, people started to see that JavaScript was really more of a language in its own right, and it was capable of doing more things than just these kind of little widgets on the page. Maybe you can actually start to build some sort of application in JavaScript all the time. And so as people started to try doing this, they ran into all sorts of problems with different browsers, kind of different problems running code that worked across different browsers. And so what they were trying to do essentially was like have this new idea of what they could do in the front end. So they were running up against all the different implementations that come down here as Netscape and Internet Explorer and Mozilla having about trying to do that. So they were getting mired down by how you implement their applications across these different platforms. So jQuery came along as kind of a way, along with other toolkits, to abstract over those differences so you can write one piece of software that can work across all those environments. Because nobody was really, not many people were really interested in writing polyfills, as they call it, or code that would run across the system and all those browsers. So jQuery is a result of kind of that time. But the problem is that people continue to develop, past that, and just past, having these things work across all the different browsers, and now they're trying to make things have a lot of state that are really more traditional applications in the original sense. And what this led to is turning a lot of people uses jQuery spaghetti. What this means is that people were making bigger things running in the browser, and there were people doing more things. It was more like today you're doing concepts like single page app or stick client, and these ideas are becoming more and more prevalent. But jQuery has no say. jQuery doesn't really say that much about how you should structure your code. There's a lot of work for you in the background on how your code will work across browsers, but it's really up to you to make sure that your code is maintainable, it's readable, and that other people can extend it, and all these things. And so for a lot of people, it's hard to keep on top of an application that's functionality changing and keep it in a maintainable state. And so a lot of code end up looking like spaghetti. It's hard to read, to debug, and tangle it apart, or untangle it. And so this is where frameworks come in. So finally, we're at the point where we hopefully are starting to see how jQuery isn't quite enough to really build your application. I think it's very possible. There are plenty of instances where you can do it and you should do it. You just build an application. In a lot of cases, and for a lot of people, it makes sense to have a separate tool that says more about how your code, how your application should be structured. Again, will not just be rollover effects that make long lived applications that are saving state and are changing over time. So having said that, again, okay. So having said that, what I want to do really quickly is run through the three frameworks that we're talking about and seeing how they interact with jQuery, because it seems like the most relevant thing for the second discussion. So this is going to be really, really quick. We just basically want to get a high-level understanding of how each of these frameworks, how they capture jQuery, or how they start using detect the jQuery presence on the page. Then how they might extend jQuery internally. So how they would use it, and then how you would use it as a person writing your code. How, even though you might be writing an application when you're running the Ember application, and you still use jQuery even in Ember. So starting with Backbone. So Backbone is the smallest of the frameworks, and you'll see that kind of reflected in the examples I'm going to show you. These are really short samples, so they're just saying, here you can see the Backbone is saving reference to the global context and calling root. And then a few lines later, it's saying that Backbone.$sign is going to be root.jQuery. You can see furthermore that it's saying that jQuery is there, that I'll be separate, and I'm going to use Ember. Otherwise, I'll just do $sign. So Backbone happens to be the most permissive of the frameworks and what kind of library it will accept. All these libraries are API compatible to an extent with jQuery, so you do have some options. You don't have to do jQuery and use that. So from there, Backbone internally is going to use jQuery to manage events. And so you can see here, this is how Backbone implements what's called a delegate events function. And so it's changing code that you might write code like this into code, into actually hooking up Backbone views to DOM events on the models. So Backbone doesn't quite extend jQuery the way we'll see with other frameworks, but because all your AJAX requests go through this method Backbone.sync, the things that it does to the requests that go to Backbone.sync are pretty much altering how jQuery works. So here we can see an example of if we're going to Backbone.sync, if the HTTP verb it's using is catch, and if we're in IE8, then it's going to do this little matching to ActiveX object to make sure that IE8 is supposed to match. There's comments here saying how to remove this if and when jQuery changes that to a And then finally, if you're running Backbone, you're still going to use jQuery from time to time. You see here, this is we're using jQuery, the Backbone API to define some events on a view, and so this is when going to be handled by the delegate events that we were looking at earlier, and it's going to hook up the right things so that when you click on an element of the class of hedgehog, and it's going to call it the private method. And from within the private method, this should be familiar to anyone who's looking for before. This is a typical jQuery event mode. You pass one argument, it's the event object, and so the event object has some application, and then within this, you can use the $sign to query the scope just to complete. And this is common another framework as well. All right, moving on to Ember. So Ember captured jQuery by just looking at Ember.input.jQuery. At first I'm like, oh, okay, fine, let's move on. Then I said, well, I don't know what Ember.input is exactly. But I dig a little bit deeper, and so you can see up here, if you look in packages /Ember metal /with/core.js, you're seeing finding Ember.imports to be either Ember.imports if it's already defined, or the global context image. So we're seeing that translation here. And this, I think, is indicative of one of the fundamental differences between Backbone.js and Ember.js. In Ember.js, you can see just in the directory structure, you're looking at two files doing the same thing, and they're both SCP within the structure. So Ember is a much, much larger project, and you can get. I'm not here to argue for or against that, but just some things you need to realize when you're kind of deciding how to use these. All right, so internally, Ember has a very, very different approach to handling events. It actually handles all DOM events kind of internally. It finds a single event handler for every kind of DOM event that might occur. So you can see this big, huge list of different DOM events. You find them all to the document body, and then in each case capturing through event bubble, and then doing the right thing, passing it to the right thing. Okay, moving. So let's see. So extensions. This is really simple. This is just Ember extending jQuery to support touch events. So that's how it's done. That's what Ember does to actually modify jQuery underneath it. And finally, if you're writing an application, we'll still use jQuery in a view, particularly in a method like insert element. So this gets called when you use insert into the DOM whenever it's been updated or renamed. Okay, finally, Angular. So Angular captures jQuery and defines jQuery method. This is looking at window.jQuery. This is much more explicit track back as much. And then finally down here in Angular.suffix, it's built and packaged together. You see that it's just going to become line jQuery. So we're seeing though this reference to jQuery. So this is an interesting aspect of Ember is that jQuery is a strict or hard dependency of Angular.js. Angular.js will run without jQuery and will use its kind of shim or like a very limited version of jQuery called jQuery. And it's just that if you happen to have jQuery defined, then it's going to override jQuery with jQuery. So if you're looking at Angular.js source, that's useful to know. So you'll see jQuery a lot of times, and that's just when jQuery is there, or it's going to be there in the other implementation. Internally, let's see, internally, Angular uses jQuery to, when it's compiling templates. So you can see here it's building out template HTML, it's trimming out the content, and it's creating actual downloads from that. So again, all the files are listed here, so if you want to find the slide later, you can kind of dive into this more. So at this time, we'll get extensions to jQuery. This is pretty straightforward. We're back to define jQuery method. Or you see that it's extend.
What's your turn?
So it's calling, it's extending jQuery.fn. So it's basically just defining 4 jQuery plugins that you use internally, and then you can use actually in directions, which is where actually you will see a lot of the most use of jQuery from people define directives, which is like essentially like packages of DOM and functionality. We might use jQuery here, so you can see this is from the TUMVC. Directive function and you see that it's on find, which is the jQuery blur, and then having the backend blur. Okay, so that's it for me. I just tried to cover as much as I could about those 3 frameworks, so you have a high-level review of like why jQuery isn't quite the structure you use, but it's not passe. It's still something that you will see, regardless of what framework you decide on. It's something you will have to be kind of familiar with and will still be using on a pretty regular basis. So that's it. Probably even a little bit of our time for questions. Alright, well, if you have any questions later, I'll be hanging around. And yeah, these comments are on these slides are on the top. So I'm going to go back and later. Alright, thanks again.
How you guys doing? I'm James. I'm trying to get this over as quick as possible, but with as much information as possible. So what I want to cover first is the toolkit known as Cujo.js. Cujo.js can be used to build applications on its own. So what's really nice about Cujo is a bunch of libraries that can be used on their own to kind of enhance your own application. So they can be used with Angular, Ember, or Backbone if you want to. Awesome libraries that make it like easy. Alright, Cujo doesn't have an icon, so this is what I think of when I think of Cujo. It's a set of libraries you use to build your apps for maintainability and extensibility. They're not dependent on any one library on their own. They try to kind of be kind of unique in that way. They don't depend on jQuery. They don't usually depend on each other. They're kind of independent standing libraries. And like I said, they can be added to existing frameworks. So this is the lineup that I want to cover. In 10 minutes, we'll give it a shot. And let's jump into it. Curl. Curl is an AMD resource loader. So you guys have heard of Require.js. So what Curl is a way of taking JavaScript code and kind of breaking it down into little modules that can be composed and built up for production use. Since JavaScript doesn't have any built-in way of handling dependency management, an AMD will give that to you. Like I said, it's like Require.js. Makes it simple to take your large application, break it up into more manageable pieces, and my slide got cut off here. These pieces can be loaded individually during development, so you can put it in a quick refresh cycle during development, but they also can be built and packaged for production. Really quick example. This is how you would define one of your modules. So this module right here is an anonymous module that uses jQuery as a dependency. It's doing this really simple, add setting the text. And then what curl does is curl will take that module, resolve it for you at runtime, and then give you my module, which has a similar to this. I'm going very quick, so cram. Cram is very simple. What cram is pretty much the build tool for curl. So once you have all these dependencies that are in individual files that are brought together at runtime, you want to kind of concatenate these together for easier delivery during production mode. Curl will do that, cram will do that for you. Require.js has something similar. R.js is notoriously difficult to configure. Pretty much once you get it all set for one time, you hope that you have something. Has a lot of options, it can be difficult to do. Cram is trying to take a very straightforward and no configuration approach. Require.js will also do more than it kind of should. It'll actually minimize your code for you. Cram doesn't do that at all. It's trying to just concatenate and do it for you. Like I said, optimizes in small modules. And it automates the building of your assets into one file. So it traces your dependencies, puts them in order into one single file. The example code is really simple. Pretty much, you can call a node, you give it the path to cram, and then you give it the path to where the entry point for your application is, in this case, Ember.js. Okay, when.js. How many of you guys are familiar with promises and deferreds? You guys know that? Alright, so what when is it's a promise deferred library. It stands on its own. So jQuery kind of has this. It has followed deferred, which will give you a similar type of concept. And there's also another library out there called Q. Q is similar to when, but is when is a little bit more, a little bit faster than Q. So what problem does the deferred promise tag kind of give you? It kind of gives you similar management of async code, so it helps you deal with that pyramid of doom that everybody talks about. I don't know what they're talking about, but I guess pyramid of doom all the time. And also, what I think is even more important than that is kind of more same error management for async code, because when exception is thrown in your async code, it's thrown in a different turn of the event loop, so you have to try to catch up with something in async, you won't use that. But if it's inside of deferred, the deferred will bubble it up in the top of your I think that's where the power of deferred is in comes from. Kind of a really quick example. So right here we create the deferred object, we get the promise, and then we're just registering a success callback or an error callback on it. Very simple example, but I'm trying to get through all the syntax. Meld.js. Meld.js is probably by far the coolest of all the Cujo libraries. It's aspect-oriented programming. Basically, what this allows you to do is you can take a function and you can use meld to wrap kind of before and after on it. So what you can do is you can modify the arguments before the function executes, allow the function to execute, but then also deal with the result after it executes. So you can wrap functionality around a function call. It also has like an after throw type of pattern, which I don't use so much, but I use a lot in kind of the before and after, which I'll show you in a kind of more complicated example. Alright, so this example here is using a promise, and what it's going to do is you're inside of a transaction here. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the transaction doesn't throw an exception. If the transaction does throw an exception, we want to roll back. If it completes successfully, we just want to make sure it's committed to the user. This will be online. You guys can take a closer look at the code. But here, this way here, the user of this function doesn't have to think about the fact that they're in a transaction. They just have to either throw an error if it's an error state, or just successfully exit out of the function and meld will take care of the before and after of that one. Messages.js. This is pretty much like pub sub and message buses, but this is kind of more like, if you think about like enterprise level, so this is kind of a full featured message bus implementation. There's lots of pub subs out there, but this one is kind of really full featured. You have a lot of adapters and kind of join points. It deals with streams and Node really well. You can create your own adapters, so you can take a message bus and transparently adapt it to go over like WebSockets from a Node stream. And then other people on that message bus can get notified of events on that bus. This is a really simple example. Pretty much we're creating a message bus here with one channel on it, which is like a tweet channel. So we're just taking our outbound adapter, which will be a function here, and we're just looking for the input on the tweet channel. So if something happens on the tweet channel, we'll deal with it here. But like I said, messages is a very full-featured message bus implementation. So if you're interested in dealing with pub sub in your application, definitely look at messages because it's very full-featured. REST.js. REST.js is kind of an HTTP client for Node.js in the browser. What's nice about it is it's kind of one API to deal with. You don't have to remember, oh, I'm in the browser, I got to use jQuery HTTP. Or, oh, I'm in Node, I got to use Node's HTTP client. This way, you kind of don't have to worry about which environment you're in. You kind of just have an HTTP client that you deal with. It's kind of like these things, like I said, it's kind of like XML HTTP threads. It's kind of Node HTTP module, jQuery, or there's an NPM package called request, which is pretty popular for an HTTP client. What it has, like I said, it has one simple API across browser and the server. It also has nice thing where you add interceptors, so you can have like an OAuth interceptor that will deal with the OAuth dance for you. But also you can do other interceptors that might transform some of the values that come back from the request, or that transform the value before the request is sent out. Here's a very straightforward example. We're pretty much just requiring the REST client here. We're just calling it on slash of pretty much ourselves, which is kind of an example. But when that resolves itself, we got the problem here. We're just logging out the results. Poly.js. So Poly.js is a shim for older environments that don't have the ES5. Additions to array and object. So this is closest to underscore. You guys familiar with underscore, right? So you get like the for each, the reduce, the map. All those things should be native on the array object in an ECMAScript 5 environment, but they're not. That's why a lot of us use underscore for that. What Poly does is it kind of just takes the environment and brings it up to a more modern level. Adds these things to the array object themselves. So you don't have to use underscore as your API. You can actually use what should be the native JavaScript API for the array object. There's no real example to show. I'm just trying to show that we're adding what should be on the array object to the array. Wire.js. Wire.js is very complicated. Wire.js is for application composition and rate. It's an IoT component for JavaScript. There's nothing like this that I know of in the JavaScript world. This is very popular in the Java world, where you use an IoT container for securing its dependencies and wiring the application up. This allows you to easily wire up the dependencies in your application. You'll see this in the code example of what I mean by this. It's based on config instead of hard coding your dependencies into your application. Alright, let's go through this very quickly. So let's say in a traditional application, what we're going to do is we're going to bring together our controller, our template, some strings for localization, and our view object. All of these things on their own are kind of their own JavaScript objects that have to be created and also given the dependencies that they need at runtime. So what you would normally do in this situation is you would wire up manually in code, get this DOM element, create this controller with this DOM element, create this view, give the view to the controller, you need to render with this template, these strings. It kind of gets to be this kind of ball of not very complicated code, but kind of very hard to kind of break up code. And you get this giant, over time, as the application gets built up, this giant entry point in your app that is just pretty much how your whole application is put together, which becomes very hard to test individual pieces, but the composition of those pieces gets very difficult. What Wire allows you to do is kind of declaratively say, you know what, this is how the application is put together based on configuration. So instead of getting the actual controller object, we're telling Wire saying, go get this thing at this path. And this is kind of what it needs to start up. So we need to download that looks like this. And it's gonna want a view. And down here, so now when you say what do you mean by view, down here we define what a view is. So the view, when it calls render, it's going to need a template and it's going to need a strings file, and those are right here. And then also down here is kind of data binding plugins. I'm not going to go into this stuff, which deals with two-way data binding on the job. That's known as Cola. Kind of moving like store that it's kind of a wire plugin that doesn't stay on the side. But even though this looks like more lines of code, this is way easier to deal with, way more declarative than ending up with this giant entry point in your main function of your application. Also, you can compose pieces of your application to do smaller integration tests instead of having to test the entire integration at once. So Wire makes that really, really easy. I'll have to admit Wire probably has a very high learning curve, but it's worth the investment if you have a few technical applications. And I came in well under 10 minutes, so maybe all that. If you're interested in Cujo.js, Cujo.js.com, and then if you have a tutorial site that just got put up, check it out. Like I said, my favorite is kind of meld together really nice. You can kind of alter your objects without actually going into the code and altering your objects.
James, you actually went over without being nice.
So thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you guys. Oh, Q&A? Okay. Asynchronous module definition. So you're defining a module that is asynchronously loaded at development time. That's where the acronym comes from. I tried to get away, but I guess I have 5 minutes of questions. So, any questions?
I got a question.
Sure.
So, are there currently any toolkits out there that are comparable to Cujo at this time?
A lot of the ideas that are in Cujo come from inspiration from Dojo. Don't tell the Cujo guys that said that, but a lot of these ideas come from Dojo. There's nothing out there that I know of where you take just one piece of it. Like in Cujo, you take just one piece and say, oh, I like meld, I'm going to use meld, but I don't care about everything else. You have to bring in everything just for that one little piece. So there's nothing out there that I know of that is as modular as Cujo.
Do you have any plans for future tools you're going to build?
We have Polo, which is the data binding library. Right now, that's only a wire plugin, but hopefully that'll be standalone at one point, so that you don't have to take the DOM and when your model changes, update the DOM manually. Polo will do all of that stuff for you. That's the only one I know that's coming very soon. But that's the only additional one I know of this.
What kind of benefit do you get if you do use it all together? Like, why is it called Cujo as one library if they're all separate modules?
All right, so they can be used all together to build an application. The only people I know that do that are the actual two founders of the project. It's called Cujo because they made it up because they wanted something that put together kind of CSS and JavaScript, but they came up with Cujo together. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it's useful altogether. I think it's more useful as two pieces than as a whole. That's it. All right, guys. Thanks for listening.
Alright, hi. My name is Patrick Holloway, and I'm a Rails developer over at Patients Like Me in Cambridge. We are a social networking site for patients with chronic diseases. And I just joined in January. I haven't been a Rails developer for very long, but I'm here tonight to give you a brief introduction to Ember.js. This is supposed to be showing me my slide. Give me 1 second to look that up.
So if you look in the right-hand corner, it might be.
I think it might just be a configuration problem with it's supposed to have a sorry, this was not my computer, so I apologize for the interruption. Send this up. Any minutes. Okay, so about a year ago, I had a photography business that had nothing to do with the web, and I had to build myself a website. So I taught myself how to build static web pages. And what I ended up with was the sort of thing that you would have been able to build with HyperCard back in the day. It sort of, it just has some links to navigate around to different content, and it has some images, it has some text, but beyond that, it's a far cry from the sorts of things we see in web applications. So what's happened that has made us need something like Ember? So recently, JavaScript got way faster, and we've got some really great tools and common practices to leverage in this JavaScript community, and we really need to make JavaScript a first-class citizen in our web applications. And a lot of us are coming out of things like Python and Rails, where we're generating lots of dynamic pages and dynamic content, but it's being built on the server and then served up as a whole web page. And we'd really like to move into a space where we're sending a lot more JSON through APIs to the client and have the client sort out what's happening in the DOM and capturing events. It's really a nicer way of doing things. So we've also had the cloud happen. So people want to access their content everywhere and have interfaces with this layer of the web. So imagine something like Google Docs. It's a stateful app. It's something that is going to be accessible whether it's on my phone, whether it's on my laptop at work, my home computer. So we start to need sorts of things that have a lot of interactivity on the client and feel like a desktop sort of app. So we've also got devices everywhere that people are accessing the web from. So we need to make these accessible in those places, but mostly the point here is that a lot of people are getting used to the sleekness of native apps on these devices and want a similar experience in the browser. And we're starting to see a lot of this stuff appear in the browser. So we've got, instead of Outlook, we've got Gmail. Instead of a DVD player, we've got Netflix. And it opens up a lot of content that we don't have to go to the store and buy. It's on the internet, we can grab whatever we want on demand. It's great. So we need a front end to match this. And HTML is a powerful tool, but it falls short, like I said earlier. So that brings us to Ember. Ember is a client-side MVC application. MVC is Model View Controller. We'll get into that a little bit more after this slide. And it's good for long-running, rich, stateful apps. So long-running means we need to manage memory. And someone's going to be on this page for hours and hours. Rich means it's got a lot of interactivity and a lot of functionality and interacts with complex business logic. So you've got the concept of a user. That user has content. That user generates content. How do you control interactions between different people? So Ember gives us some tools to start working with these things in a smarter way. So let's talk a little bit about the history behind Ember. Ember started as Sprout Core, which was a web application framework that a couple of people started and turned into a project at Apple to build MobileMe, which was sort of what we had before iCloud. And it was sort of a flop, but it was a ambitious foray into this space. And the stuff that's come out of it is Ember. Sprout Core turned into Ember. A lot of the core teams still on Ember, including Yehuda, who has brought us wonderful things such as, a lot of stuff that he's contributed to Rails, a lot of stuff he's contributed to jQuery. He's been a massive force in JavaScript and web application space. And Tom Gale on the middle there, he was on the Sprout Core team along with Yehuda and Charles Jolly, and they pulled a lot of concepts very liberally from other spaces. So they took Model View Controller, which is, like I said, we'll get more into that later. And Cujo and iOS is built using Model View Controller, but it's on the desktop. But it uses a lot of the same ideas. And Ruby on Rails, a lot of shared concepts here. So for those of you who aren't necessarily back-end developers, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of Model View Controller architecture. So it's a object-oriented design pattern that's helpful for separating concerns in your code base when you're dealing with. So say you have your data over here and you have your view over here. So you want to abstract away certain levels so that if you're in the model and have the concept of this is where I'm saving my users' data. If they come back to the page, they want it to still be there. And we want to decide how these objects and models that we're working with are interacting with each other. And we want that encapsulated here. The view is concerned with how it's presented to people, and the controller sort of model, what's the word, mediates between them. So a concrete example of where this concept might be helpful is, say your model was a event stream with stream events. And in the view, it would be your event stream on your Facebook page. If you wanted to change the algorithm that decided the ranking of the different posts that came up, you could easily just go into your controller and change the algorithm that was fetching them from the model, and you wouldn't have to change anything in the view, you wouldn't have to change anything in the model. On top of this, this is great for testing. So now you can test your models with unit tests, you can test your controllers with functional tests, you can test your views with, well, you probably end up doing all those in the case of Ember all over again. But you'd be able to do integration tests that tested everything front to back. And that's really helpful if you're building a huge complex app. As developers, we really want to be able to get into a space where we know the health of our app. So I haven't really talked much about Ember. So Ember models, all objects in Ember inherit from Ember object, and so we're not using plain JavaScript objects. And so you can see here that we can define a function on it, it has a name, and this is typically how we handle inheritance. So this is something you'd see in Ruby. You'd see a user class. It has some attributes. It has some relationships to other objects. So it has some friends. It has one bio. It has some validations on the things that we're going to be saving. Ember has a lot of the same stuff in Ember data, which is similar ORM. So you get attributes that you put on, you can define relationships, and you end up with this in your client-side code, which is really helpful because who doesn't want to be working with object-oriented models when you're doing complex web applications. So I have some stuff here, but I think I'm going to skip over most of it and hop onto a live code demo. That's not taking a risk, is it? So, all right. So, where's my stuff? Let's open it in Chrome. From the internet. Don't trust it. Oh no, that's not right. Okay. Okay. So here we go. This is master detail view, so I can click these images over here, and these are being pulled in using routes up here. Ember allows us to use the URLs to sort of define routes. So here we say, oh, I want my photos, and which photo do I want? I want photo number 8. Photo number 1, great. So this, is something that you can easily do in all sorts of other stuff. But if we open up the console here, we can say app.photo, which is our model, and we can say find one, and it's going to retrieve that first photo. And why don't we assign this something so we can play with it a bit. So I can say get and title, and it's going to let me get the title, set the title to something, and and watch what happens here. It happens right away. We have data binding so that this element is bound directly to the stuff on this model. And if I pull up, no, I want to zoom in out of this view. How do I do that? There we go. Let's take a look at the code really quickly. So I'm going to open this in Xcode, please. Sorry, go over. Oh no, registration request.
See Splines there as well if you want to use that.
So we're using handlebars. Well, actually, I'm using emblem, but the type of language that it uses by default is handlebars. It's easier to show you what's going on without all the HTML crap down here. So we're able to use a templating system that is indentation aware, so that I don't have to write close tags and open tags and stuff like that. Say H1 is this. It's really nice. But it just helps you see what logic is going on. But you can see down here, we have this concept of output, and that's going to open up the JavaScript files here. Oh, so right at the top here, we have the application that we're creating in Ember. That's how we sort of bootstrap it. Then we have a router, which is assigning a resource called photos, and it has a nested resource called photo, which is why we were able in the URL to specify, oh, let's look at photos, and it showed an index view of, here's some photos on the side here. And we were able to specify a path to a specific photo, and it pulled in one by its ID, specifically in the larger queue. And you can see that, sorry, this scroll's awkward. So we have photo models defined. Typically this wouldn't be fixtures, this would be like an actual backend, like Rails, sending up JSON. but there are all sorts of different adapters you can use to get different types of backgrounds. But it's tapping into some JSON. Sure, I can wrap it up. Sorry, I wish I could show you more live code demos. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to talk to me about it afterwards. I hope some of that was helpful. If you have any questions now.
Are you going to post the code examples?
Yeah, and I think that in the interest of I did more than I was able to present, I might do a little screencast, but it's very similar to the Peak Code screencast, which is only like $12. So, if you want something pretty good, you can go do that. But I'll probably post that free by the end of the week.
So I know my understanding of this is Ember is significantly heavier than Backbone, but what is there a lot more? I mean, I didn't really see what more to do than Backbone. I guess it was very quick, but
so the big thing with Ember versus Backbone is probably a pretty good tool if you have a brownfield app that you need to put some Ajax sort of stuff onto your pages. But if you're working with a greenfield app that you're building from the ground up, you can be building a JSON API for your backend, and maybe have mobile devices hooking into it, and so ending up with Ember, you have convention over configuration as like this huge thing in Ember, which makes it so that when you set up your views and controllers and your models, there's a lot of conventions that make it so that sort of magic stuff happens behind the scenes. It's imperative code. And when you're writing Backbone, you sort of have to wire up everything yourself and be very explicit. And some people argue that in Backbone, there's a lot of boilerplate. In Ember, there's a lot of boilerplate. Yeah, there's going to be a lot in both. But if you follow certain conventions in Ember, a lot of stuff starts to happen sort of automatically. And the problem there is you just have to really know what's happening behind the scenes and get comfortable in that space. But Ember is huge. I mean, it has the Ember data alone is a really ambitious project. Building an ORM that's sort of agnostic to what it's tapping into is a pretty difficult challenge because data is serialized in a lot of different ways, and JSON isn't that flexible. I mean, I don't know. So, yeah, it's a lot more complicated. Yeah.
So are you using it in production? I mean, how production ready is it? I mean, it looks a lot like Rails and JavaScript, but in that case, debugging it, if you run into an issue,
right. So currently, the state of Ember is that it's release candidate 4, which was like 2 days ago, and Ember Data just had its first official release, and it's version 0.13 or something like that. It's really early in the game, even though it's been in the works for a long time, because it was coming out of Sprout Core, but they're really trying to stabilize it and make it a solid platform, but it's just not there yet. So there's still a lot of changes. If you write code now, they try to stabilize it, but it is probably prone to change. It's probably prone to have bugs. It's not really production ready. We are, at Patients Like Me, we have a sort of side project that's not facing our 200,000 users. It's going to be used to have a couple of our clients tap into it. So we don't need to count on them being able to use Internet Explorer 7. We don't need to count on them. I don't know. That's an answer, maybe a little too long.
So you're saying brownfield application?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, throwing too much jargon around. So a brownfield app is an existing app. So like for example, the app that I work on Patients Like Me. Is a Rails application that has been around for about 6 or 7 years and has been in production that long. And so changing stuff on it is difficult because it's like a huge, gigantic app, and to rewrite the whole thing would take another 7 years. So that's a brownfield app, and so you've got a lot of old code on there that uses old conventions, and it's difficult to mount onto new technologies. And so Bootstrap might be great there because I just need a chunk of it to be working with Ajax. If I'm going to be architecting something from the ground up that's going to be only a client-side app, I'd like to be using something closer to Ember. Yep.
Two quick questions. It seems that Ember is fairly new. How long has it been around? And my second question is, how would you explain what an MVC is? I know you got into it earlier, but more on the lines of to someone who is completely unfamiliar with JavaScript or MVC
Right.
at all.
Can you do it without using words like MB or C?
Yeah, so in a case where you have a lot of web apps today, you sign in, you're a user. You have code that needs, you have data when you're a user that needs to exist when you log back in. That's the stuff that's in your models and in your data. Sorry to use the M words. And then you have to present it to people. And it's a common pattern. And we've found good ways of dealing with the complexities that come out of that and sort of separating or decoupling the code in healthy ways that allow us to change the moving parts without breaking the other parts. And testing are things that fall out of MVC. And so it's just a beneficial pattern that lets us use concepts in object-oriented programming. And I don't know. It's tough to explain MVC in a few minutes. It took me a long time to understand even the basic concepts. But
And how long has it been around exactly?
MVC?
No, Ember.
Oh, Ember. Ember has been around, well, conceptually, it's been around for a long time, probably at least a decade, going back to Scrub Core. But as far as Ember itself, I believe it's been around for about a year and a half or something like that. I
That sounds about right.
don't actually know. But, it's just hitting first, official releases this year. Ember hit its first release in January, February, release candidate 1, and then Ember Data just had its first official release 2 days ago. So it's really just starting to stabilize now, and they're trying to lock it down so that people can start using it and move to production.
I think we got one more question.
Yep.
Are there differences in the way MVC applies to Ember and the way it applies to Rails?
Yes, very different ways.
What are
Yeah, it's entirely different. So the views, you don't actually end up using the views a whole lot in Ember because handlebars is so powerful. Also, it's just a straight space where the controllers are a little bit different, where they're not the things calling in your data. The routes are specifying where to grab the data from. I don't know. Sorry, that's a tough one for me to answer on the spot. But I'll just talk to you about it after.
I don't know if there's time for one question.
Yeah, I think we gotta move on to the next speaker, but you can grab Patrick at the end of the event if you have any more questions. Go ahead.
double full screen. All right, my name is Dave, and I'm going to be talking about Backbone. So in the spirit, in the philosophy of Backbone, I'll be keeping this short and sweet. I'll be talking, oh, here, this guy. So Backbone in 3 words is minimalist, unopinionated, and hackable. So, the entire source code for the Backbone library is 1,500 lines of code. That includes comments, and it's unminified. 30% of that is comments, so the actual library weighs in at under 1,000 lines. It's really tiny. To give you a sense of how this stacks up against some of the other major frameworks, I've made a couple graphs here. Backbone is this tiny little sliver over here. The green is comments, and the blue is actual source code. So you can see Angular is about 15,000 lines, and Ember is pushing 30,000 lines of code. From a weight in terms of file download, it's the same kind of picture here. Backbone's just over 6K, with Angular at about 30 and Ember breaking 50K. Now, I'm not using this to necessarily say that Backbone is better because it has fewer lines of code or it's smaller. In fact, I think that's a point that gets made erroneously. 50K is like a really tiny image in your design. You can drop one image out of your design, you pay for Ember. So that's not the point I'm trying to make here. The point is that it's an order of magnitude smaller in terms of scale and complexity. In the entire Backbone library, there are really 4 modules or classes that you're going to be working with. Models, collections, views, and routers. There's a few other half-breeds like events and some history stuff, but you don't typically touch that when you work with Backbone. This is the stuff that you need to learn if you want to learn Backbone. If you learn the methods and properties on these classes, you basically know the entire library. Backbone is unopinionated. You want to use handlebars as your templating language instead of the conventional underscore templates? Go right ahead. It doesn't care. In fact, Backbone does not have any built-in rendering or templating functionality. It's all just convention. What about module loaders? We saw Cujo earlier has an AMD bundler. What if you want to use a Common.js spec or carrier pigeons? Whatever it is that you want to use, Backbone doesn't care about the larger structure of your application. It's very small, very focused, and unopinionated. What if you actually don't like part of Backbone itself? What if you hate Backbone collections? That's cool, don't use them. Each of those modules that I described are virtually unattached to each other. You can rip one out. In fact, I have projects where I've completely deleted the view source code from the Backbone library because I wasn't using it at all. Backbone doesn't care. But let's say you actually want to add something into Backbone, something that's not already there. Backbone is oops, you can use events or not. I jumped ahead of myself there. So Backbone is heavily event-driven internally, but there's no reason you have to use events. If you want to use some other system, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to shoot yourself in the foot, have at it. But what if you want to add something to Backbone? It's not already there. Backbone is easily hackable. So this is one of the most common requests that I've encountered when I work with people who are new to Backbone, especially people who come from like a Rails kind of environment. They want route filtering. And what route filtering is let's say you've got a whole bunch of different pages in your application, and many of them are behind a login. Like you have to log in and have admin access. You could include the authentication code in every single route handler. You could say, if user is logged in, then allow the action. Otherwise, do something else. But that's repetitive, and it's not very dry. Instead, what most frameworks allow you to do is route filtering, where you basically encapsulate certain routes with some wrapper code. So in Rails, this would be like a before filter for your controllers. So a common request when people encounter Backbone is, how do I do something like this? How do I prevent people from accessing those pages when they aren't logged in? Backbone routers are kind of dumb in a sense. They don't do a lot for you. They handle the URL changes, the history API, all that fun stuff. But when it comes to actually some of these more advanced features like route filtering or nested routing, resources, that kind of thing, you're on your own. But there's a great pull request on the GitHub project for route filters. And Jeremy Eshkenes, the creator of Backbone, has a comment there where he basically says, why not do something like this? So this is a quick code example here. I've got my Backbone router at the bottom. And you can see I've defined my admin-only route. And that will call this function when that route is hit. But if you notice, it's not just a function that's defined here. I'm actually wrapping it with this call to authenticate. And if we look up top, you can see the authenticate function takes in that original route that was going to fire, holds onto it for a second, then sees, is the user logged in? If so, do the original route. Otherwise, go to the login page. So maybe like half a dozen lines of code, and you have route filters for Backbone. But if you notice, I didn't use Backbone at all. This is just JavaScript. This is just first-class functions. There's no Backbone library going on here. Another thing I love about Backbone is that there are so many plugins. This was a list I put together from 5 minutes of scanning the wiki page on the Backbone project for plugins that are available. These are all plugins, and I'll throw up a link. These are all links you can check out. But you can validate your data, auto-generate form HTML, provide undos in your application out of the box, use local storage as a cache or a full-fledged persistence layer, connect to an SAP instance, SharePoint, work out of the box with a backend as a service, like Convey maybe, shameless plug. Bind your data to the DOM bidirectionally. Drop in a completely editable spreadsheet, basically out of the box. Or even layer more structure on top of Backbone already. But these three aspects of Backbone, it's minimalist, unopinionated, and hackable, have drawbacks. So let's say you want to capture a clip on a button in your application using Backbone. This is kind of a trivial example, but this is basically the minimum amount of code required to capture a clip. It's kind of a lot. There's a lot of boilerplate stuff to set up here. If you're using something like Ember, that's like one tag in your template. So Backbone definitely has some drawbacks. The minimalism means more boilerplate for you to write. How about attaching a child view? So this is like the perennial problem with Backbone and some other JavaScript frameworks as well. You want to nest views inside of other views. So we were looking at the photo list earlier on the Ember example. That list of all the photos on the side, and that might be a list view as a container, and then each photo is an independent view nested inside that. Backbone doesn't offer any built-in functionality for nesting views. I can't imagine an application that doesn't require nesting views. So what happens is, here's one solution, but there's like 500 other solutions to this problem. And the problem here is that everybody does it their own way. So Backbone is unopinionated, but it doesn't offer you any guidance. You want to go build a complex application, good luck. It gives you a screwdriver and a wrench and says build a car with no instruction. And lastly, because it's hackable, it means that there are going to be multiple solutions to the same problem. So if we go back to the earlier slide with all the plugins listed, if you're paying attention, the link for the validation plugins is actually 3 separate links, one on each word. That's because there are 3 really big validation plugins for Backbone, and they're like all kind of equally popular, and they all have drawbacks and advantages. And if you want to use it, that means that you've got to sift through and figure out which one makes the most sense for your application. So, my goal here is to try and help you guys figure out whether or not you guys should tackle using Backbone. So, I think Backbone is great if you value 3 things. No magic, flexibility, and customization. There's no magic in Backbone. You see everything going on under the hood. It doesn't handle very much for you at all. It gives you the structure and the guidance for those basic building blocks and lets you run with it, which means that it's flexible. You can do pretty much whatever you want. And you can customize it. Like we saw earlier, you can add route filters very easily. Backbone's not going to be so great if you value less boilerplate. In my opinion, you're going to be writing more code if you use Backbone compared to most other JavaScript frameworks. It does not give you as much out of the box, so to speak, at least for larger applications. It's not going to give you that guidance. It's not going to tell you what to do. It's not going to tell you how to solve the problem. It will give you the tools to do it, but it will leave you to shoot yourself in the foot if you want. And lastly, if you want more magic. If you come from a Rails background and you like the ability to just drop in that keyword on your model and all of a sudden all this magic happens behind the scenes, Backbone's not for you. You can't do that with Backbone. You've got to understand everything that's happening under the hood. So hopefully that's helpful in understanding a bit about Backbone, and I'll take questions. Yes, sir.
So there's no convention with Backbone. It's pretty much, each Backbone app can kind of be its own unique thing. In your experience, if people come onto your team with Backbone experience from somewhere else, is that harder to get them acclimated to your app, or is it, easy, difficult? Because are they bringing baggage with them from their past Backbone application that isn't compatible with the way you use Backbone? And if it is, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general it's not as big of a problem because I think very few people have a comprehensive solution for Backbone such that they get ingrained in it in a way that's difficult to shift gears. In my experience, I have yet to see a complex Backbone application that does not modify the Backbone core itself. And so what that means is that every project is going to be a little bit different. So the downside of that is that every project is different. I mean, you've got to do it over again every time in some cases. But when you do have someone join your team, they're used to shifting gears. It's not like you've been ingrained in one framework, one language, one way of doing things, and then you throw a slight curveball and it's like, I've never seen that before. I can't do it. Yes, sir.
So what is your opinion on the difference between a framework and a library? Are those two words interchangeable? And from some people that I've talked to who have used JavaScript and are pretty familiar with it, I guess it depends on who you talk to. They consider Backbone.js a framework, and then some other people I've talked to have considered it more of a data modeling library.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to address that, but 10 minutes is a very short amount of time. I would call Backbone more of a library, drawn out like that though, not confidently. You wouldn't typically use Backbone on top of Ember, you wouldn't use them together. So in that sense, it's a framework that I haven't really seen a lot of use cases for combining it with other frameworks. But on the flip side, it does so little that it's kind of hard to call it a framework in the sense that something like Ember is a framework, where Ember handles almost everything for you. So in that sense, I think there is an important difference. Which word you want to choose is up to you, yes. Does that answer your question?
I think so. And I've also heard that you can create libraries with Backbone.
So earlier on the plugins page, so these three are actually links to frameworks that are built on top of Backbone. So they take Backbone and extend it and add more structure. It's not like they combine it with a separate library that could be used disjointed, but they combine it. So this is Thorax, Marionette, and Chaplin, I think. But those are the three big sort of Backbone frameworks, if you want to call it. And those take Backbone the next step and provide you with a lot of the functionality that you can see in other heavier weight frameworks. Was there a question back there?
I was going to ask about Marionette, Thorax, Spine, and Chaplin.
Did I cover it, or?
I was that using Backbone as sort of the backbone for a framework and how that relates to these. So, sure.
Yeah. So basically, it's these three guys. I forgot to put Spine into. Is Spine built on Backbone?
It's at least philosophically related.
Okay. So Thorax, Chaplin, and Marionette are built on top of Backbone. Backbone is a hard dependency for those libraries. I think Spine is similar in concepts, but it's not actually dependent on Backbone. But these three guys are, like I said, they give you that extra bit of structure, and so they answer some of those guidance questions, and they take away some of that boilerplate. And I think the goal of those frameworks tends to be to try and find, maybe if there is such a thing, a happy medium in between Backbone's flexibility and maybe some of the larger frameworks' power and ease of use. So the nice part is that you can tend to pick and choose from them, so you can investigate them, but they each have their advantages and drawbacks. So, yeah.
I know there's been some work done to use parts of Backbone on the server side as well, and, and kind of bridge that a little bit, and maybe do some server-side rendering and that sort of thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or experience with it, or.
So that's something that I wouldn't say is necessarily specific to Backbone. I think I would imagine that the efforts to do that kind of work are probably centered on Backbone because it's arguably the most popular framework out there, or the most widely used. I don't want to like start a flame war or something by saying that, but I think that the server-side rendering aspect of it, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there, but it's not directly tied to Backbone in any way. It's really valuable when you come across single-page web apps that need to have some kind of SEO ability, because Google, for instance, can't read a single-page web app. Like, it doesn't know how to browse through the different pages and load content from the server. You know, maybe it does in secret and they haven't told anybody about it, but until they do, I think you should probably assume that they don't know how to do that. In that case, what the common solution is to attempt basically to recreate a browser environment on the server, maybe using something like Phantom.js or Node if you don't need a full browser environment. And you actually run your client-side application on the server, render out what the page would look like if it was in a browser and someone had clicked to that point, and then send that to Googlebot when it comes around to request your page. So that's it. So if you're building a single-page web app, Backbone, Ember, Angular, whatever, and it needs to be indexed by search engines, and it needs to be found by search engines, that's a big concern that you need to address, is how are they going to find it? Because if there's content in those pages, most search engines, most likely Google, can't see it.
On the slides, you compared Backbone to Ember, and you had another one called Knockout.
Yeah.
What is that in a nutshell?
I haven't used Knockout a whole lot, so I don't want to like speak for it necessarily. It's another JavaScript framework. I think it has two-way binding models to DOM, some other features. I haven't used a lot, so I don't
It's something very similar to MVC, MVVM they call it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I think it's a Microsoft initiative project.
Okay. Yeah, it's another JavaScript framework. It's one that didn't get covered here tonight. But... Any other questions?
Thanks, Kid.
And this is the address. If you guys want any of these ones.
Alright, so I'm back again. Sorry about that, guys. I'm going to be doing kind of intro to Angular. I did a long form of this talk at Angular.js Boston. So some of you guys, I know it's some of you guys there, so you're really familiar with this talk. So we're going to try to get through it in less than 10 minutes. So you can see how well that goes. Alright. Angular.js. Sometimes with Angular.js it can be hard to figure out where to begin because the documentation isn't that good. So with this kind of quick tutorial, I'm going to go through and kind of show you how to get the most bang for your time. You guys can investigate Angular on your own. I'm going to show off kind of some of the fancy stuff. So if you guys are all interested in Angular. How is Angular different than a lot of the other frameworks out there? So with Angular, what's nice about Angular is they kind of thought about testing first when they wrote the framework. So it has a lot of tools in there to make testing easy. And along with a lot of the UI examples on Angular site, you'll also see this is also how you test it. Kind of something that Rails did early on, and I think it helped with software quality and a lot of Rails apps that are out there now. So that's something you see in Angular as well. two-way data bindings. So what that means is when your model changes, your view updates. So you don't really have to manage updating the DOM. I got called out on Twitter for saying it was 2013. I don't want to be doing DOM manipulation anymore. So Angular takes care of a lot of that for you. So you don't have to worry about it. Dependency injection. That pretty much at a high level just gives you a way of easily mocking some of your objects, so that you can test easily without bringing in all of your dependencies. And then that actually gives you a way of creating new HTML elements that can encapsulate a lot of complex behavior behind one HTML tag. Those are known as references. We'll get into some of that. I'm going to show you guys how to use the scope. I think that's the most important thing to get out of Angular when you're first starting out is make sure you understand how to use this scope. That's how you bind a lot of your data from your model to your view. Let's see a simple scope demo here. We got Garbage Cat here. We got some data binding on the range control here. Some data binding on the input. Some data binding on the button. And then we go and take a look at the code. Look at my code. Sorry. I was hoping to come on one laptop. That's me, guys. Nice cycle. It's not you. Nothing great except for you. Alright, here we go. Let's get back to this here. So let's just take a quick look at the simple one and see how much code is behind that example I just showed you. So the simple, this is pretty much that page. What we have here are kind of things that you put in your markup that tell Angular what to do with this piece of the DOM. So pretty much we're saying, on click, we're gonna just toggle this value here. We're gonna show highs this DOM only here. We're gonna update the text of this H2. So pretty much we're just encapsulating a lot of our basic behavior in the HTML markup itself. There actually is no JavaScript that goes behind these. This is pretty much just Angular working with the DOM through the direction you give it through the HTML binary. I think it's pretty powerful. The less code that I have to write, the less code I have to maintain, the less plug I'm going to write per day. That's a nice thing to have. So that's a simple demo. Like I was saying earlier, the scope pretty much just binds your HTML to your data model. It does a couple other things, but that's pretty much the big takeaway for what the scope is. Now let's take a look at a controller. So now we're going to add some behavior that's outside of what Angular will do for us. So we have like great to do app here. We add to it. So we just get rid of the pencil and all that stuff. And now if we go and look at the code for this, controller.html. So in here, this is our markup. We have an ng repeat, which just iterates over our to-dos. We have an ng click on each of those, which is just remove this thing you clicked on. And then just a form that's going to call our add function. And the JavaScript that goes along with this is very minimal as well. Pretty much here's our controller. Here's our scope that I keep talking about, the thing that defines your data models to your HTML. We're just defining a list of objects on the scope here, so just the to-dos. Here's that add function where we can add a to-do. And then when we click the remove button, here's the remove. That's all the code you use for that simple to-do application. Now, so the nice thing about Angular is we can change something on the scope with an ng click or yeah, with an ng click and it'll take care of updating the model for you and then updating the view automatically for you. The way it does that is, since you're doing things on the scope and you're using clicks that are within the Angular framework, it knows when a change probably happened and will automatically update the DOM for you. Now the problem that you start to get is if you start to do something outside of that lifecycle that's not directly related to Angular, this is where you step out of the framework. The framework really can't do some of the natural things for you. So this demo, what we're doing is we're updating the time here on the scope. You can see here we're updating the time, but our UI is not reflecting it because this time is being updated in a set timeout. So it's being done outside of the Angular framework. Angular doesn't know that this has happened, so the UI is not updated. So Angular gives you a way to go in and say, hey, something changed here, you might want to take a look at it. And in this example here, I'm actually giving Angular the hint that, hey, something has changed here, or probably changed here, you might want to take a look at it and if so update your UI. We'll take a look at that code real quick. I'll show you how we actually show show Angular that something happens if we take a look. Alright, so here we have kind of just an update time function, which pretty much just takes the local time from the browser. We're scheduling our tick of the clock just every second, and we're logging out down here the time, right? This scope.apply right here is kind of the hint that Angular needs to know that something has changed outside of itself. So if we want to do something on set timeout, or we have some other library that we're integrating with that might change the model, we're going to need to do it within the scope.apply so that the framework will know something probably changed that it needs to go and update the UI. That's maybe a drawback of the framework, but it's something that will get you really early on when you start to play with it, and you'll do things outside of the framework without realizing you're doing it, and then you won't understand why your UI isn't updating itself. So just be aware that if you're changing the model and it's not updating the UI like you expect it to, usually just throw a scope apply on it and see if that fixes it, and then you'll be good to go. But just try to understand that, oh, okay, I understand why this happens. I understand I changed it outside of Angular, so I needed to tell Angular that something happened.
Is it that binding, or is that it's the scope
so what it's going to do is it's going to trigger the digest phase in the scope. And what happens there is Angular will go through the scope and see if any of the values change on that part from the start position and go further down the choice. That's just telling Angular that the scope has changed from this point down somewhere, and then what that will do so that you can update yourself.
So are you using scope in the same term as like this? And like
so okay, so that's bad. That's the bad thing, and I didn't clarify this. Angular has terms that it uses loosey-goosey like model and scope, and you think we understand what that means in JavaScript, but it doesn't mean the same thing it does in JavaScript. So the scope that you're talking about, where scope is like this, you get like the global scope, the function scope. That's not related to scope, dollar scope, which is different in Angular. Dollar scope is pretty much just the point that you are in the application at that time. So you're scoped to the clock controller, you know, not the scope of the function that the clock controller is. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So don't think of it in terms of again, it's not timing. Don't think of it in terms of JavaScript scope. Think of it as it's Angular scope. Scope inheritance, we're going to blast right through this one. But pretty much the scope is a tree. And children of the tree can see attributes that are on their parent. So when you change a parent attribute, the child controllers can actually see that value as well. But once the child gets a value, it can no longer see its parent value. So you see down here, the child now has its own value, so it will not look to its parent for its value. But if it doesn't have that value, it will look to its parent for the value. So that becomes really nice for kind of default settings that come from each parent. Pub sub, you can do pub sub on the scope. So you can broadcast up the scope. Broadcast is down the scope. Emit is up the scope. So you can let everybody above you know, hey, something changed, or everybody below you know, something changed. Everybody finds out that. One thing about it is it doesn't really work with siblings. So if you have a sibling here, they'll never get the message that something changed on the scope. You have to just be aware that siblings can't know about a broadcast or emit. The best thing you probably do is just reach up to the parent and broadcast down so that you get your sibling. You want to go pretty quick, but I think some closing tips. Don't fight Angular. Work within the framework so that it can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Not, unlike Backbone, this is going to do a lot of things for you, but you have to do it the way that it expects you to do it. Don't try to do things the way you want to do it. Look through the source. It's pretty lengthy, but it comments very well. Test-driven development is driven very hard in this framework. Take baby steps. Like I said, understand the scope, understand the bindings. That'll get you a lot of the way to kind of understand Angular. And embrace the scope, create new models on the scope so that the two bindings can happen automatically. And that's it. You have no more than this. Any questions? Yeah. I don't know what MVC is.
So, from your experience with Angular, what makes it different than something like Ember.js?
Okay, so what Angular is, what it allows me to do on my team specifically is I can give a lot of power to the designer to do a lot of the work that a JavaScript developer would normally do. Because a lot of things can be expressed in the HTML that would normally have to be expressed in JavaScript. So I can create reusable pieces of functionality that look like DOM elements to the designer. And the designer can mix and match those however they want in the DOM. That's pretty much the power that I see in Angular and that I use on my team. Some people don't like that you're mixing some of your concerns with your HTML. I really don't think that trade-off is a deal breaker. It's kind of just philosophy that you go, move one way or the other towards. I'd rather get my the more junior or designer level people on the team the power to create engaging UIs. Then you have to require all these JavaScript developers.
Can you use HTML and CSS with Angular, or not?
Oh yeah, it's central. It's HTML is very important to Angular. That's how you tell Angular where to put its values is by marking up the HTML with special they call them records and bindings with the mustache templates. So it's very important. And CSS is just styling anyway. You were going to use CSS.
And that's not a problem with the newer like HTML5 patterns. That's all.
No, that all works. And I actually a point towards CSS is animations are coming to Angular, and it leverages most of its animations through CSS animations. So you're not burdening your JavaScript renders with the animation queues that usually use like jQuery animations. So it's kind of leveraging more advanced CSS3 for animation.
Do you find that you're using it mostly to do widget type stuff like that, or are there applications where you can zoom out to do more extensive stuff like have some global architecture?
Yeah, so the way that I use it is they're kind of more simpler UIs. They're not like multiple pages within a single page app. But Angular can still be used for the multiple view single page app. I don't know what you call that. You know what I'm trying to say. And I've seen at the Angular.js Boston, I've seen a lot of apps where we have one app where they created a traffic simulation that was multiple pages using Angular. So they had an app animated with traffic, and you can put different choke points on the app. You can see that the traffic will start to back up, as you adjust the show points on there. So it's flexible enough to be larger and things like that. You brought up a great point with memory Ember. With the modern browsers, I haven't seen problems with memory usage on Angular. Older browsers, I don't know where to go for anything less than 98 right now. So I can't think of anything older than that.
Yeah, I think his question earlier, what's the difference between MVC and Ember? A good answer for that is memory management. You know, sort of what gets thrown out when you log out is on the bottom layer. What gets thrown out when you change from one page to another throws out whatever's in views. Controllers keep what's around while you log in. Does Ember have? I mean, does Angular have?
Yeah,
you can stuff like that.
You can destroy the view and you can destroy the scope.
Do you have to do it manually?
The router can do all that. You can do it manually. It'll actually do all that stuff. So you can do it manually. Anything? Yeah.
Same question before, how about in terms of production use?
So production use, I actually can speak to this one because I use it in production. My app runs on an advertising network. We have over 700 domains right now, 50 million users per month. Very, very low error rate right now. So works great for us. And Google uses it in production for some of their AdWords UI. And actually, I think if you do a Google search for build with Angular, you can actually take a look at some of the other production apps that are using that are using Angular now.
You're using it on the admin side?
What was that?
We're using on the admin side of the ad serving system?
No, I was at a client facing. We use it for our widgets that show up in the page as well as our landing page that's set up kind of in a mobile light right now.
Is Angular attempting to sort of be a precursor to web components? Is that Google's kind of
that's a good question because we have this coming with web components. We can kind of do a lot of what I just explained in Angular, right? And it's funny because Dart is also kind of approaching the same thing at the same time. I don't know what the future holds for web components in Angular, but there is a lot of talk on the project that kind of embracing web components. I don't know what that's going to mean for the future. I guess we'll see. They're all going in that direction, at least in Google.
It's pretty funny that you mentioned that because before I came to the event, I read somebody's tweet, something to that effect that Angular might be the next like HTML6. But my actual question was, can you use Angular for mobile development if you were to create like a web app, like a single page web app, and basically wrap it for mobile development?
Yeah, so some of our engagement units on the network that on the advertising network, the groups that I work for, actually run on iPad and iPhone, and more modern Android devices. The older Android devices prior to 4.0, the browser was kind of a nightmare. But the more modern ones, we have that problem with it. That's it. All right, thanks, guys.
I guess this concludes the event. Before everybody goes, we're actually going to raffle off those prizes. So we're going to give the others to the other co-organizers.